North Korea, officially the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, is a country in East Asia, in the northern part of the Korean peninsula. The name Korea is derived from the Kingdom of Goryeo, also spelled as Koryo. The capital and largest city is Pyongyang. North Korea shares a land border with China to the north and northwest, along the Amnok and Tumen rivers, and a small section of the Tumen River also forms a border with Russia to the northeast. The Korean Demilitarized Zone marks the boundary between North Korea and South Korea. Korea was annexed by the Empire of Japan in 1910. After the Japanese surrender at the end of World War II in 1945, Korea was divided into two zones by the United States and the Soviet Union, with the north occupied by the Soviets and the south by the Americans. Negotiations on reunification failed, and in 1948 two separate governments were formed: the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north, and the Republic of Korea in the south. An invasion initiated by North Korea led to the Korean War. Although the Korean Armistice Agreement brought about a ceasefire, no official peace treaty was ever signed. Both states were accepted into the United Nations in 1991. The DPRK officially describes itself as a self-reliant socialist state and holds elections. Internationally, however, it is considered a totalitarian dictatorship. Various outlets have called it Stalinist, particularly noting the elaborate cult of personality around Kim Il-sung and his family. International organizations have also assessed human rights violations in North Korea as belonging to a category of their own, with no parallel in the contemporary world. The Workers' Party of Korea, led by a member of the ruling family, holds power in the state and leads the Democratic Front for the Reunification of the Fatherland, of which all political officers are required to be members. Over time, North Korea has gradually distanced itself from the world communist movement. Juche, an ideology of national self-reliance, was introduced into the constitution as a creative application of Marxism-Leninism, in 1972. The means of production are owned by the state through state-run enterprises and collectivized farms. Most services such as healthcare, education, housing and food production are subsidized or state-funded. In the late 1990s, North Korea suffered from a famine that resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of civilians. North Korea continues to struggle with food production to this day. North Korea follows Songun, or military-first policy. It is the world's most militarized society, with a total of 9,495,000 active, reserve, and paramilitary personnel. Its active duty army of 1.21 million is the fourth largest in the world, after China, the US, and India. It also possesses nuclear weapons. Etymology: the name Korea derives from Goryeo, itself referring to the ancient kingdom of Goryeo, the first Korean dynasty visited by Persian merchants who referred to Goryeo as Korea. The term Goryeo also widely became used to refer to Goryeo, which renamed itself Koryo in the 5th century. The modern spelling, Korea, first appeared in late 17th century in the travel writings of the Dutch East India Company's Hendrik Hamel. Despite the coexistence of the speakings Korea and Korea in 19th century publications, some Koreans believe that Japan, around the time of the Japanese occupation, intentionally standardized the spelling on Korea, making Japan appear first alphabetically. Other commentators have pointed out that Japan continued to refer to Korea as Korea and Chosen even after Japan absorbed Korea, and that Japan had no need to concern itself with Korea's alphabetical position, and thus, Korea ceased to appear as an independent entity in international forums. After Goryeo fell in 1392, Joseon became the official name for the entire territory, though it was not universally accepted. The new official name has its origin in the ancient country of Gojoseon. In 1897, the Joseon dynasties changed the official name of the country from Joseon to Deonjeguk. The name Dian, which means Great Han, literally derives from Samhain. However, the name Joseon was still widely used by Koreans to refer to their country, though it was no longer the official name. Under Japanese rule, the names Han and Joseon coexisted. There were several groups who fought for independence, the most notable being the Provisional Government of the Republic of Korea. History. Early history. Korean history begins with the founding of Joseon in 2333 BC by Dangun. According to Korean Foundation mythology, Gojoseon expanded until it controlled northern Korean peninsula and some parts of Manchuria. The Gojo Joseon was purportedly founded in 12th century BC, and its existence and role have been controversial in the modern era. In the 2nd century BC, Wiman Joseon, which fell to the Han China near the end of the century. Later the Han dynasty defeated the Wiman Joseon and set up 4 commanderies of Han in 108 BC. There was a significant Chinese presence in northern parts of the Korean peninsula during the next century, and the Lelang commandery persisted for about 400 years until it was conquered by Goguryeo. After many conflicts with the Chinese Han dynasty, Gojoseon disintegrated, leading to the Proto-Three Kingdoms of Korea period. In the early centuries of the Common Era, Baekje, Goguryeo, Dongye, and the Samhan Confederacy occupied the peninsula and southern Manchuria. Of the various states, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla grew to control the peninsula as three kingdoms of Korea. The unification of the three kingdoms by Silla in 676 led to the North-South States period, in which much of the Korean peninsula was controlled by unified Silla, while Bala succeeded to have the control of northern parts of Goguryeo. In unified Silla, poetry and art was encouraged, and Buddhist culture thrived. Relationships between Korea and China remained relatively peaceful during this time. However, unified Silla weakened under internal strife, and surrendered to Goryeo in 935. Bala, Silla's neighbor to the north, was formed as a successor state to Goguryeo. During its height, Bala controlled most of Manchuria and parts of Russian Far East. It fell to the Khitan in 926. The peninsula was united by King Taireo of Goryeo in 936. Like Silla, Goryeo was a highly cultural state and created the Jikji in 1377, using the world's oldest movable metal-type printing press. The Mongol invasions in the 13th century greatly weakened Goryeo. After nearly 30 years of war, Goryeo continued to rule Korea, though as a tributary ally to the Mongols. After the Mongolian Empire collapsed, severe political strife followed and the Goryeo dynasty was replaced by the Joseon dynasty in 1392. Following a rebellion by General Yi Seonggaye, King Taireo declared the new name of Korea as Joseon, in reference to Gojoseon, and moved the capital to Hanseong. The first 200 years of the Joseon dynasty were marked by relative peace and saw the creation of Hangul by King Sejong the Great in the 15th century, and the rise in influence of Confucianism in the country. Between 1592 and 1598, Japan invaded Korea. Toyotomi Hideyoshi led the Japanese forces, but his advance was halted by Korean forces with assistance from righteous army militias and Ming dynasty Chinese troops. Through a series of successful battles of attrition, the Japanese forces were eventually forced to withdraw, and subsequently signed a peace agreement with diplomats of Ming China. This war also saw the rise of Admiral Yi Sun-sin and his renowned turtle ship. In the 1620s and 1630s, Joseon suffered from invasions by the Manchu which eventually extended to China as well. After another series of wars against Manchuria, Joseon experienced a nearly 200-year period of peace. King Yeongjo and King Zhengzhou particularly led a new renaissance of the Joseon dynasty. Japanese occupation. The latter years of the Joseon dynasty were marked by isolation from the outside world. During the 19th century, Korea's isolationist policy earned it the name the Hermit Kingdom. The Joseon dynasty tried to protect itself against Western imperialism, but was eventually forced to open trade. After the First Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War, Korea was occupied by Japan. Japan tried to suppress Korean traditions and culture and ran the economy primarily for its own benefit. Anti-Japanese, pro-liberation rallies took place nationwide on 1 March 1919. About 7,000 people were killed during the suppression of this movement. Continued anti-Japanese uprisings, such as the nationwide uprising of students in 1929, led to the strengthening of military rule in 1931. After the outbreaks of the Sino-Japanese War in 1937 and World War II, Japan stepped up efforts to extinguish Korean culture. Koreans were forced to adopt Japanese names. Worship at Japanese Shinto shrines was made compulsory. The school curriculum was radically modified to eliminate teaching in the Korean language and history. Numerous Korean cultural artifacts were destroyed or taken to Japan. Resistance groups known as Dongnipgun operated along the Sino-Korean border, fighting guerrilla warfare against Japanese forces. Some of them took part in Allied action in China and parts of Southeast Asia. One of the guerrilla leaders was the communist Kim Il-sung, who later became the leader of North Korea. During World War II, Koreans at home were forced to support the Japanese war effort. Tens of thousands of men were conscripted into Japan's military. Around 200,000 girls and women, many from Korea, were forced to engage in sexual services for the Japanese military, with the euphemism, comfort women. Soviet occupation and division of Korea. At the end of World War II in 1945, the Korean peninsula was divided into two zones along the 38th parallel, with the northern half of the peninsula occupied by the Soviet Union and the southern half by the United States. Initial hopes for a unified, independent Korea evaporated as the politics of the Cold War resulted in the establishment of two separate states with diametrically opposed political, economic, and social systems. Soviet General Terentij Shchikov recommended the establishment of the Soviet Civil Authority in October 1945, and supported Kim Il-sung as chairman of the Provisional People's Committee for North Korea, established in February 1946. During the provisional government, Shchikov's chief accomplishment was a sweeping land reform program that broke North Korea's stratified class system. Landlords and Japanese collaborators fled to the south, where there was no land reform and sporadic unrest. Shchikov nationalized key industries and led the Soviet delegation to talks on the future of Korea in Moscow and Seoul. In September 1946, South Korean citizens had risen up against the Allied military government. In April 1948, an uprising of the Jeju Islanders was violently crushed. The South declared its statehood in May 1948, and 2 months later the ardent anti-communist Syngman Rhee became its ruler. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea was established in the north on 9 September 1948. Shchikov served as the first Soviet ambassador, while Kim Il-sung became premier. Soviet forces withdrew from the north in 1948 and most American forces withdrew from the south the following year. Ambassador Shchikov suspected Rhee was planning to invade the north, and was sympathetic to Kim's goal of Korean unification under socialism. The two successfully lobbied Joseph Stalin to support a short blitzkrieg of the South, which culminated in the outbreak of the Korean War. The military of North Korea invaded the South on 25 June 1950, and swiftly overran most of the country. A United Nations force, led by the United States, intervened to defend the South, and rapidly advanced into North Korea. As they neared the border with China, Chinese forces intervened on behalf of North Korea, shifting the balance of the war again. Fighting ended on 27 July 1953, with an armistice that approximately restored the original boundaries between North and South Korea. More than 1 million civilians and soldiers were killed in the war. As a result of the war, almost every substantial building in North Korea was destroyed. Although some have referred to the conflict as a civil war, other important factors were involved. The Korean War was also the first armed confrontation of the Cold War and set the standard for many later conflicts. It is often viewed as an example of the proxy war, where the two superpowers would fight in another country, forcing the people in that country to suffer most of the destruction and death involved in a war between such large nations. The superpowers avoided descending into an all-out war against one another, as well as the mutual use of nuclear weapons. It also expanded the Cold War, which to that point had mostly been concerned with Europe. A heavily guarded demilitarized zone still divides the peninsula, and an anti-communist and anti-North Korea sentiment remains in South Korea. Since the war, the United States has maintained a strong military presence in the South, which is depicted by the North Korean government as an imperialist occupation force. Post-war developments. The relative peace between the South and the North following the armistice was interrupted by border skirmishes, celebrity abductions, and assassination attempts. The North failed in several assassination attempts on South Korean leaders, most notably in 1968. 1974 and the Rangoon bombing in 1983. Tunnels were frequently found under the DMZ, and war nearly broke out over the axe murder incident at Panmunjom in 1976. In 1973, extremely secret, high-level contacts began to be conducted through the offices of the Red Cross, but ended after the Panmunjom incident, with little progress having been made and the idea that the two Koreas would join international organizations separately. During the 1956 August faction incident, Kim Il-sung successfully resisted efforts by the Soviet Union and China to depose him in favor of Soviet Koreans or the pro-Chinese Yan'an faction. The last Chinese troops withdrew from the country in October 1958. Which is the consensus as the latest date when North Korea became effectively independent, though some scholars believe that the 1956 August incident demonstrated independence. North Korea remained closely aligned to China and the Soviet Union, and the Sino-Soviet split allowed Kim to play the powers off each other. North Korea sought to become a leader of the non-aligned movement, and emphasized the ideology of Juche to distinguish it from both the Soviet Union and China. Recovery from the war was quick. By 1957, industrial production reached 1949 levels. In 1959, relations with Japan had improved somewhat, and North Korea began allowing the repatriation of Japanese citizens in the country. The same year, North Korea revalued the North Korean won, which held greater value than its South Korean counterpart. Until the 1960s, economic growth was higher than in South Korea, and North Korean GDP per capita was equal to that of its southern neighbor as late as 1976. In the early 1970s, China began normalizing its relations with the West, particularly the US, and re-evaluating its relations with North Korea. The diplomatic problems culminated in 1976 with the death of Mao Zedong. In response, Kim Il-sung began severing ties with China and re-emphasizing national and economic self-reliance enshrined in his Juche idea, which promoted producing everything within the country. By the 1980s, the economy had begun to stagnate, started its long decline in 1987, and almost completely collapsed after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, when all Russian aid was suddenly halted. The North began re-establishing trade relations with China shortly thereafter, but the Chinese could not afford to provide enough food aid to meet demand. The arduous march in 1992, as Kim Il-sung's health began deteriorating, Kim Jong-il slowly began taking over various state tasks. Kim Il-sung died of a heart attack in 1994, in the midst of a standoff with the United States over North Korean nuclear weapon development. Kim declared a 3-year period of national mourning before officially announcing his position as the new leader. North Korean efforts to build nuclear weapons were halted by the agreed framework negotiations with U.S. President Bill Clinton. Kim Jong-il instituted a policy called Song-an, or military first. There is much speculation about this policy being used as a strategy to strengthen the military while discouraging coup attempts. Restrictions on travel were tightened and the state security apparatus was strengthened. Flooding in the mid-1990s exacerbated the economic crisis, severely damaging crops and infrastructure, and led to widespread famine which the government proved incapable of curtailing. In 1996, the government accepted UN food aid. Since the outbreak of the famine, the government has reluctantly tolerated illegal black markets while officially maintaining a state socialist economy. Corruption flourished and disillusionment with the regime spread. In the late 1990s, North Korea began making attempts at normalizing relations with the West and continuously renegotiating disarmament deals with U.S. officials in exchange for economic aid. At the same time, building on Nordpolitik, South Korea began to engage with the North as part of its Sunshine Policy. 21st century. The international environment changed with the election of U.S. President George W. Bush in 2001. His administration rejected South Korea's Sunshine Policy and the agreed framework. The U.S. government treated North Korea as a rogue state, while North Korea redoubled its efforts to acquire nuclear weapons to avoid the fate of Iraq. On October 9, 2006, North Korea announced it had conducted its first nuclear weapons test. In August 2009, former U.S. President Bill Clinton met with Kim Jong-il to secure the release of 2 American journalists who had been sentenced for entering the country illegally. Current U.S. President Barack Obama's position towards North Korea has been to resist making deals with North Korea for the sake of diffusing tension, a policy known as strategic patience. Tensions with South Korea and the United States increased in 2010 with the sinking of the South Korean warship Cheonan and North Korea's shelling of Yeonpyeong Island. On 17 December 2011, the supreme leader of North Korea Kim Jong-il died from a heart attack. His youngest son Kim Jong-un was announced as his successor. In 2013, an international crisis erupted regarding North Korea's attempts to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles.